I didn't take my calcium when I was a child. All right, so Hebrews 11:17. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, through Isaac shall your offering be named. He considered that God was able to even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. Right, so turn to Genesis 22, verses 1 through 14. So after these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. He said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, took 2 of his young men with him, and his son Isaac, cut the wood for the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. Now on the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. And Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering, laid it on Isaac his son, and he took it in his hand, the fire and the knife. So they went both of them together. Isaac said to his father, Abraham, my father? And he said, here I am, my son. He said, behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. So they went both of them together. Now when they came to the place of which God had told them, Abraham built the altar where they laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar, on top of the wood. And Abraham reached out his hand and took his knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham! And he said, here I am. He said, do not lay your hand on the boy, or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, and seeing that you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram, caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram, and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of the place, the Lord will provide. And it is said to this day, on the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. All right, let's pray for these verses. God, Father, Lord, thank you so much for these just an incredible example of test, Father, Lord, in our daily lives. We're tested because we live in a fallen world, and we were also tested for reasons of proving the fact that there are areas that we need to work on, that we need to trust you, Father, Lord, and you expose those areas of weaknesses, as well as for areas for us to be sanctified, and to improve our ways, and the way we walk righteously. So I pray that you help us to take a right perspective about the way we get tested. And it's not about whether we want to be tested, but we need to be tested. And often that it is. And that through that process, we come closer to you. So thank you and praise in Jesus Christ. Welcome. Good morning, everybody. We're going through a series during the summertime, starting at the place of Hebrews 11, where it's this long list of people. The writer's talking about faith, and he says, here's the definition in Hebrews 11, chapter 1, which you can read on the screen, kind of. But the writer of Hebrews doesn't stop there. He says, listen, if you want to push this narrative, if you want to push the definition further into your life, here are the narratives to go along with it. Here are some examples. And we've seen that these people, some of them, they look like they're all perfect and polished on the outside, but on the inside they battle and they wane and they struggle with this issue of faith, just like you, just like me, just like we do. And each week we've been tackling one of them, Abel, Enoch, and Noah, and Abraham. We looked at part of his faith last week. And we're looking at another part this week, because Abraham, in that passage of Hebrews 11, if you look at it, gets the most words written about him, the most airtime. And so today what we're going to look at is a different perspective on Abraham's faith. If you were here last week, you remember that I said Abraham's faith was a going out faith. It was a faith where he had the faith in the faithful. He had faith in God. He didn't have necessarily the faith in his journey. He didn't know where he was going, when he was going, and how he was going to go. He had faith in the one who took him by the hand
faith that I'm going to call a tested faith. Because at the beginning of the passage in Hebrews starts off with, and then he says, God tested Abraham. And I want to look at this test. I want us to look at this and break it apart a little bit. And I know that you probably read this, many of you have read this passage over and over again. And some things might get missed with regularity. So I want to pause on a couple of words that they use in the passage of Genesis and in this narrative of what's going on. What is God really doing to Abraham? What is God really doing to him when he tests him? Is he just a cruel, maniacal, tyrannical God who just likes to toy with ants in his ant farm? Or does he have something else going on that's deeper that you and I can learn from today? So listen, I'm going to look at it this way. First, we're going to look at the presence of the test, the purpose for the test, and the power. There's a presence, there's a purpose, and there's a power. There's a presence. Let me start off by saying this. And Scott kind of got to it in his prayer. God does test you. Start the Bible, throughout life, you know this. God will test you. And many people, they pause at this. Many people say, listen, that's exactly what I am. That is exactly why I have my religion. That is exactly why I have my Christianity. Why would an all-loving, all-knowing God feel the need to test you? Why is he some cruel headmaster wrapping your knuckles and testing you over and over again? And many people say, listen, this is why I don't like the church. And this is why I don't like this God of the Bible. I just want to pause for a second. And I want to tell you, yes, God tests you, and he will test you. And he's testing Abraham. But in essence of life, there are two types of tests. There really fundamentally boils down to two types of tests. And for all of you who've gone to school, you probably have had these two types of teachers that test you in these two types of ways. And here's what I'm going to call them first. There's tests that prove you, and there's tests that improve you. Let me say it another way. There's tests that show you, and there's tests that grow you. And to give you an idea of what I would mean by this, just to give you an illustration of what a test is that proves you versus a test that improves you, we're going to do a little activity. You're going to take a test today. You're going to take two tests. I know everybody's looking at me like, wait, I didn't come to church to take a test. I know. They're easy tests. Each of you should have a pencil near you. And if you don't, find a buddy. Come on, everybody, play along. It's fun. I'm going to explain what I mean by a test that proves you and a test that improves you. Okay, so I'm going to do two tests with you, and they're only 3 questions each, so it's really short. So don't sweat, don't stress, okay? I'm going to put the questions on the screen, I'll read them out, and you follow along as best as you can. Here's test number 1. Okay, here's test number 1. Ready? 3 questions. No cheating. I see some of you here have your smartphones. No cheating, okay? Here you go. What is the distance in the miles from Earth to the moon? Steve, write it down, come on. No smartphones, no cheating. Okay, distance in miles from Earth to Mars. Next question. What is the periodic symbol for tantalum pentoxide? Okay, I know, so you're what? You see, you're starting to see where I'm going a little bit here. Wait, just wait. It'll all make sense in my own way. What is the periodic symbol for tantalum pentoxide? You can't go random guess. You can't go wrong. You know, we're not going to grade you. And who was the king of England in 1635? Okay, so some of you might get close on this one. You'll have a big pool to choose from. Okay. Now I know you're dying to know these answers. A lot of you are very competitive sorts, so let's just get the answers out. This is the first test, by the way, but you're going to take another one in a second. The distance from miles from Earth to Mars is 140 million miles. Okay. Anybody close? Nobody? Halfway? Okay, what is the periodic symbol for tantalum pentoxide? It's Ta2O5. Okay. I don't think anybody got that one. If you did, then please tell me, because I'm going to be friends with you. Guess that one. Who was the king of England in 1635? It was Charles I. Close. Some people were close. You had a Charles in there, I know. Okay. Now that was the first test. Okay, that was the first one. Here's the second test. But before I get to the second test, let's do something. I'm going to give you some facts, and I want you might want to write these down. You might want to write them down. Just a suggestion. Q is the 17th letter of the English alphabet. Okay? Got it? You might want to write that down. Just throwing it out there. Shanghai is the world's largest city by area. And out of the 5 ocean basins, major ocean basins, the Arctic Ocean is the world's smallest ocean. Okay, got it? Ready for test number 2? Okay, here's test number 2. What is the 17th letter of the English alphabet? You You see where I'm going? What is the smallest ocean in the world? Now, do I need to show these answers? No. Why? You see the difference between those two tests? The first one was to prove to you how little you knew. The first was to prove to you that I Googled tantalum pentoxide. I didn't know that before. That test was to show you that I could Google it, and you didn't know that. It was to prove how deficient you were in your knowledge of something. But the second test, you see what happened? I gave you the answers to prepare you for it, so that you would improve. Now, most of you maybe didn't know the smallest ocean in the world or what the world's largest city by area was before you came here. But statistically and scientifically, you're more likely to remember the answers to the second test than to the first one. Think right now. Which do you remember more readily? You remember the ones that I prepared you for. You remember the ones that I intended you to improve on, not to just prove how deficient you were. Now, why did I do all this? Because it's very frustrating to get mad at it. It's very easy to get frustrated at God and say, why are you testing me? You must know this. All throughout the Bible, the test of God, or the second test, he always tests the second way. It's the devil who tests the first way. Do you remember the story of Job? The devil says, let's go, and let's test this guy. Why? Because the devil wants to show how deficient Job is. The devil wants to prove that Job isn't all that he says he is. And throughout the Bible, what we see time and time again is that the test of God, the presence of them, what they're meant to do, they're not meant to prove to you your inadequacies. They're meant to improve those inadequacies. It's not the first test. It's the second. God is always preparing you for ways to test you on next, so that you'll learn from it and grow from it. Now, he does the same thing to Abraham today. That's the presence of the test. The test exists, yes. But before you start getting all willy-nilly mad at God for the fact that he tests you, notice that his tests are meant to improve, not to just prove your deficiencies. Secondly, what's the purpose of this test of Abraham? Why would God do this to him? After all, Abraham is this chosen guy, and God's supposed to love him, and God has promised him. Time and time again, if you know the story, God has promised him that your descendants will be as numerous as the sands on the sea and the stars in the sky. And God fills his head with all these wonderful promises. And he says, you're going to have a son, and that son is going to be the heir. And through him, the whole world is going to be populated. And then God comes to him and tests him. Why? Now, I've read this passage hundreds of times, and I missed a key word. God comes to Abraham, if you look back in Genesis 22, and he says, give me your only son. Well, if you know your Bible, Isaac was not his only son. He actually had another son named Ishmael through his maidservant Hagar when he didn't believe in the promises of God. God says, come and give me your only. He's not his only son. But for all effects and purposes, it had become his only. And God, in the next line, needles it home a little bit more, and he says, give me your only son, whom you love. Do you see what's going on here? God is saying to Abraham, something has become your only. Something besides me has become the thing you set your heart on. God looks at Abraham and says, this is your only child. It's not his only child, but it had become his only. It had become his only, it had become the center of his life. It had become the center purpose of it. Now here's what pause. And here's what's interesting about life. Is that nothing was wrong with Isaac. And nothing was wrong with Abraham loving Isaac. It's a good thing for a father to love a son. And it's a good thing to have a son, for those of you who do. You know this. But God looks at Abraham and he says, your good thing has become your ultimate thing. All the promises that Isaac was supposed to deliver, that was what Abraham had started to rest in. And God says, I want your only. I want the thing in your life that you say, if only this, then I'll be happy. If only I can get to this place in my career, if only I have this type of security, if only I get this spouse, if only I get children, if only, and God says, I want that only. That has become the center of your heart. And I want you to burn it. good things, when we make them the ultimate things, become the ultimate controllers of ourselves. Watchman Nee, I think that hopefully I put this quote in your outline, this way. He says, we approach God like little children with open hands, begging for gifts. And because he's a good God, he fills our hands with good things. Life, health, friends, money, success, recognition, challenge, marriage, children, a nice home, a good job, all the things that we count in Thanksgiving when we count our blessings. And so, like children, we rejoice in what we have received and run around comparing what we have with each other. When our hands are finally full, God says, my child, I long to have fellowship with you. Reach out your hand and take my hand. For we can't do it. Because our hands are full. God, we can't, we cry. Put those things aside and take my hand. No, we can't. It's too hard to put them down. I'm the one who gave them to you in the first place. Oh God, what you've asked is too hard. Please don't ask us to put these things aside. And God says quietly, you must. See, for Abraham, and just like us, a good thing had become the ultimate thing. Isaac had become his little only, his little precious. And he held them and he clutched them, and God says, listen, if you're going to get back into a right relationship with me, you've got to let that go. And you've got to burn it at the altar. And it would have been an extremely powerful thing, as you can imagine, for Abraham to have to consider doing this. Not just his son, but the son who was supposed to be the heir, the son who was supposed to be all the promises, carry Abraham's name into the future, and then he had to get rid of it. All of Abraham's recognition, all of his achievement, all of his success, all of his glory rested in Isaac. What is it resting for you and me? Charles Spurgeon, if you ever love to get a poetic take on something, he had a famous sermon about this, Abraham and Isaac, and he says this, he talks about the grief, of what Abraham would have been experiencing, and he says, oh, but what would your grief be if you had but one child? What agony to have torn from you the only token of your mutual love, the only representative of your race. Cruel, he says, is the wind which uproots the only heir of the ancient tree. Rude is the hand which dashes the only blossom from the rose. And he looks at God, and says, ruthless spoiler, to deprive you of your sole heir, the cornerstone of your love, the polished pillar of your hope. Brothers and sisters, here, God is going to give you a test, but his test is going to be to uproot the thing that is the only in your life. The polished pillar of your hope. What is that this morning for you? What would you say right now? Finish the sentence, if only, then I'll be happy. And God says, if there's anything in that space other than me, you will go down like a sinking ship with it, and I'll need to uproot it, and I'll need to pull it out of your heart. That's the purpose of the test. To get rid of our own ways. Now, how do you start to do that? When you find something in your life is taking center hold of your heart, and you go think about it before you go to sleep, or you wake up in the middle of the night thinking about it, or you wake up in the morning and you can't get over it, you can't get by it, you can't get around it. You know why? Because it's rooted there. It's your only, it's your precious. And it's going to take you. There's a way to get rid of it. And the gospel lets you do that. Here's how you do it. There's two ways that Abraham does it. With reason and with the land. Look at this first. If you look back in Hebrews 11, it says that Abraham, it says consider, that word is actually translated better as reason. And I know many people look at the topic of faith and they say, well, faith is over here, and reason is over here. They don't correspond. Yes, they do. In the Bible, they do. See, it says Abraham reasoned that God could raise Isaac from the dead. He didn't know if he would. He didn't know that he would. So Abraham wasn't whistling a merry song as he walked up the mountainside with Isaac saying, wow, I can't wait to see how he resurrects him today. He wasn't happy about it, but he reasoned, he says, that God could do it. Why? Because this was Abraham's first test. If you remember the story of Abraham, he's gone through many other tests. Sarah was, his wife, and created a whole bunch of trouble. There was the test of whether he would actually have the son Isaac, and he failed that test because he went off on his own and had Ishmael. Abraham knows. See, he's reasoning. He's starting to say, look, I'm in the middle of a test, but what I'm going to do is step back and see the greater context of what God has done for me. And every time Abraham is taking a test, when Abraham chose to take the test his way, he fails. When he takes God's way, he succeeds. And Abraham's knowing this. He's reasoning. He reasoned that he did. He says, wait a second. I'm in the middle of a test, and I may not know what the purpose of this is, and I may not like this. Who would? Tearing the child out of your bosom, the polished pillar of your hope is going to be burnt. And he says, I don't really know what this is, but wait, I will take a step back, and I will see all the times in which I've said to God, my will be done, not thine, and it's been a failure. And he starts to reason. That's not the end. He starts to reason when he sees the land. Let me explain what I mean by that. You got to know a little bit of history, and I'll sum this up in about a minute of thousands of years of Jewish history if I can do that. Let's see if I can cram it in 1 minute. If you go back to the book of Numbers 3 in the Bible, God basically said, listen, I'll paraphrase. He says, listen, there's such a big gap between you and me, people. He says, you guys and me, you've sinned so bad, you've messed up your life so much, there's such a big gap. And he says, I have the right to take the life of your firstborn child. He says this to all of his people. Now, why does he say that? Because the firstborn child was the golden child. It was your name. It was your wealth. It was your reputation. Your firstborn child was your identity. It was everything. And God says, listen, in Numbers 3, he says, I have every right to take this from you. Because of the gap between you and me. But in Numbers 3, he does something very interesting. He says, listen, if you pay 5 shekels, I'll give you back the life of your son. Now, to Abraham, he doesn't get this option. To Abraham, he says, listen, I have the right to your firstborn son. You can't pay for him. You have to burn him. You have to give him up. He's become your only. There's such a gap between you and me. You've chosen him as your only over me. And now you must burn it. You must get rid of it. The only way to do it is going to rip it from you. God says, this time you can't pay 5 shekels for your son. Go to the mountain and take care of it yourself. Did you notice that as he does it, Abraham, if you pause on this little line, remember Isaac, imagine Isaac saying, wait a second, Dad, okay, we got the firewood, we got your knife, we got the fire, we're missing something there. Isaac's not done. He gets it, right? He's starting to say, wait a second. I'm putting 2 and 2 together here, Pops. What are you doing? What do you got going on here? And he screams out, hey, Father, and then Abraham says, here I am. He says, we've got the wood, we got the fire, we got the knife, we got everything for the sacrifice, but we don't have the lamb. And the most interesting thing that Abraham says is, he doesn't say, hey, Isaac, shut up. Just get walking. You know what he simply says? He says, there will be a lamb provided. And this is grace. This is looking in the midst of your tests, the test of your life, the great test you may have gone through, or you are going through now, or you will go through in the future, and saying, listen, Abraham says, look, there will be a lamb provided. I know it. And you and I, since we're on this side of the cross, we know that lamb that was provided. This whole story takes place on Mount Moriah, which is later where the temple is built, and another mountain over on Calvary. A similar story happens. God puts the firewood and the wood on his son's back. And that son marches up the mountainside. And while Isaac is spared, the lamb is not. God says, listen, Isaac and Abraham are but a shadow of showing you what Christ had done for you. He says, Abraham, you're going to get to the mountain and I'll give you the lamb. I'll give you grace. In the midst of your test, when you have to uproot the only out of your life, the precious, the centerpiece, when you have to take it out, he says, I will do it for you. I'll give you the lamb. You don't do it. I will. And Abraham knows this at the foot of the mountain. How much more do you and I know this, staring at the mountain where Jesus is crucified? Spurgeon, again, he Isaac and Jesus, Abraham was almost forced to lose his only son. God did lose his only son to get you back. And Charles Spurgeon says this: you see how the parallel holds. And as you behold the earthly parent with anguish in his face, about to drive the knife into the heart of his dear child, you have before you, as nearly as earthly pictures can paint heavenly things, the mirror of the divine Father, about to give up the well-beloved, the just for the unjust, that he may bring us to God. It says here in one of Spurgeon's notes that he actually started weeping uncontrollably during the middle of this message, and he says, I pause here. What further can I say? It is not, as I have said before, a theme for words, but for the heart's emotions, for the kisses of your lips, and the tears of your soul. If you know that in the midst of your test in life, that Jesus suffered the ultimate test, and he went to it to get you back, what then can you not go through? What test will crush you? Nothing will. What will become your only? He will. You and I can give up our onlys in our life only when we see that he first gave up his only. He did it for you. Spurgeon says, words can't capture this. I pause. I weep at this. Make him your only today. And if you do, there's no part of your life that you won't go into and bless and give you joy unending. And you can sing that famous hymn, take my life and let it be consecrated, Lord, to thee. Take my moments and my days, let them flow in ceaseless praise. Take my hands and let them move with the impulse of thy love. Take my feet and let them be swift and beautiful for thee. Take my will and make it thine. It shall no longer be mine. Take my heart, it is thine own. It shall be thy royal throne. Take my love, Lord. I pour it at thy feet, its treasure stored. Take myself, and I will be ever only all for thee. Listen, brothers and sisters. The gospel says, by grace, the Lamb was provided. You think you're going to have to go through the ultimate pain and torture? He already did. On that mountain for Abraham, the Lamb was provided. On this, the cross, we see the other Lamb, the Son, provided for you and me to win us back. That's grace. If you meditate on that, he will start to become your only. Take myself, and I will ever only be all for thee. Pray with me, please. Heavenly Father, we seek to take time in silence right now to meditate on these truths, to reflect on this. Oh, the beauty and polished pillar of hope, your Son, given for us. What test can we not withstand? What only can we not rid ourselves of? Teach us that by grace you provided that Lamb to win us back. Take a moment of silence now and pray to God, reflecting on these words, these truths.